And that army veterans will be protected from prosecution for alleged historic abuses under plans to introduce a 10-year limit on new cases. The Defence Secretary, Gavin Williamson, is expected to bring forward the proposed legislation. It comes amid claims that 4 army veterans are expected to be charged with murder over the deaths of Bloody Sunday protesters. The Ulster Unionist Party MLA and former soldier Doug Beattie is with us this morning. Good morning to you, Doug.
Morning, Stephen.
Good morning. And Colonel Richard Kemp. Richard, good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Good morning. So, Doug, why should any soldier be protected from prosecution?
Well, I'll be honest with you, Stephen, I don't think any should. The military in operations throughout the world adhere to the law of armed conflict. They adhere to military law, they adhere to civil law, and they adhere to the rules of engagement. And in 99% of the cases, that they work within that. On the odd occasion when they go outside, then they should face the law the same as everybody else. Nobody is above the law. So I don't think anybody should be given any free passes in regards to this. What we can do is we can take into account the circumstances of what happened. We can look at what year and what was going on at the time of what happened, and they can all be brought before the courts. But actions need to be tested, and if they have to be tested in a law court, then they have to be tested in a law court.
Colonel Kemp?
Well, I agree to a very large extent with what Doug Beattie has just said. I do think that Bloody Sunday, and I've always thought, certainly since reading the Bloody Sunday report, I've always thought that the British Army as a whole on Bloody Sunday behaved extremely badly, and I don't think there's really much dispute about that. Obviously, there are two sides to everything, but I think when you look at it, the British Army should not have done what it did. Having said that, I really don't believe that we should now be holding individual soldiers who are very old men now, so many years after the event, responsible to the extent they're prosecuted in court. Now, I'm not sure for a start how likely that these charges are going to succeed is after all this time. And when you're putting these old men through such a traumatic process as a murder or unlawful killing trial, then you do need to be pretty confident, I think, that you're going to get the result you want in the end. In other words...
Why does it matter if they're old? Why has their age got to do with it?
Well, it's probably more to do with the fact that that it's been such a long time since these offences were allegedly committed. I think that's one of the biggest problems. But the other problem is that these men were acting, they weren't acting alone, they were acting within a military organisation which had expectations of them, which gave them certain orders, which conditioned them to act in a certain way. And the people that sent them there, perhaps with not sufficient training and preparation, and the people that commanded their actions, these are not being tried because in the majority of cases, as far as I'm aware, they're dead now. And I'm talking about politicians, senior officers on the ground, and generals. And so what's happening is that a few people are being singled out to represent the bad actions of a unit of the army of its own. And I don't think that's right, and particularly when you put it in the context of the IRA terrorists and other terrorists who, in so many cases, are being let off from being charged or have been released early from their sentences of very, very serious crime.
When you say let off from being charged, are you suggesting that the state, this would be a huge accusation to make, the state or indeed the police force have enough evidence to charge former IRA people and they're turning a blind eye? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, we've seen letters of comfort which have been issued which have prevented alleged terrorists from being tried for certain offences in a number of cases. We've also, as I said, we've seen some very, very serious terrorist murderers released from jail in only a very short time into their conviction. So it's a combination of those two things, and the context of that, the Good Friday Agreement, and the need to find peace in Northern Ireland, which of course has largely been found now, I think should be taken into account in decisions about prosecuting soldiers as well.
Doug?
Well, that's an interesting one to go off with, Stephen. I mean, it is going off topic very slightly, and it does expand it. But it's absolutely right that some terrorists have been let off, even though that we know that they have been involved in crimes. So if you look at between 1998 and 2002, 16 convicted IRA terrorists received pardons. They were pardoned for their actions straight away. And then we do have the letters of comfort, the OTR letters, which are not an amnesty, but they have delayed and they have denied justice, so that there is a wider discussion here.
Yeah,
I mean,
and Doug, Sinn Féin, you've heard them argue that there were thousands of Republican people who went through the prison system and only a handful of British soldiers. Yeah,
absolutely. And again, we can't...
Do you acknowledge there's an imbalance or not?
Well, it depends how you think of an imbalance. So let me just give this to you, Stephen. We are talking about thousands of explosions. Tens of thousands of explosions in Northern Ireland and in Great Britain, and the vast majority of them were by Republican terrorists. There's why you've got so many going into jail, because not only the guy who planted it, but the guy who built it, not only the guy who built it, but the guy who delivered it. And these are the people who have gone through the jail system. Now, you can argue about how many went through and we have to balance the books. It doesn't work that way. What we need to have is a balanced and fair and proportionate system which looks at legacy in the round. And what we're doing, and we talked about this last week, is we are looking at legacy piecemeal at this moment in time. And we can't do that. And I do have this fundamental problem as well, is that it always seems to be the foot soldier who carries the can for decisions that were made at the higher levels. And I kind of wish we could point the fingers at those people at the very top of the tree who made these decisions in the first place and then sent out the young men and women to carry out their actions. And I mean that on both sides here. I mean that whether in the military or whether they were terrorists.
How is it rational, Colonel Kemp, for you to argue that there needs to be a type of amnesty for people depending on what age they are?
Well, I wasn't really making that point. I was talking about the length of time since the crime was committed and the likelihood that length of time is going to inevitably, as it almost always does in court cases, make the case against them much weaker because so much time has passed. But I would also take you up on the point
you did say it would be counterproductive to bring prosecutions against OAPs.
Yeah, well, I think it would be, but not just specifically because they're OAPs. But one thing I would like to take you up on is the point you just spoke about with Doug Beattie, which is this imbalance between terrorists and soldiers being prosecuted. Well, it's actually, with all due respect, it's an absurd thing to say because the soldiers, the terrorists went out with a specific intention of illegally killing, maiming and destroying. Soldiers went out with a specific intention of stopping that and saving lives. Now, that's not to say that in some cases, in the occasional case, you didn't get a bad soldier who wanted deliberately to do a bad thing, because you do. But the reality
and that's
is
a particular way of looking at it. Some people think that there were elements of the state that went out with a premeditated, organised mindset to kill.
Well, if that's the case, if that is specifically the case, then of course those cases should be dealt with. But what I'm talking about is the gross imbalance between terrorists and soldiers being prosecuted, and you have young men or old men, however. I don't want to differentiate between age. You have men being sent out onto the streets of Northern Ireland in the fields of Fermanagh and South Armagh, who are effectively fighting a war, because back in the 70s, as you know as well as I do, that was what was happening. It was a very serious war. At least in 1972, 73, more soldiers were killed each of those years than have been killed in any single year in Afghanistan, which was recognised as a war. And you can't expect young soldiers to always get things right in those very confusing circumstances. So, of course, as well as the occasional bad soldier, you also got the occasional incident, perhaps more than the occasional incident, where things went wrong and soldiers shot someone they shouldn't have done. But that can't be compared in any way to a terrorist who deliberately goes out to murder, maim and destroy.
Let's see what we're saying at home this morning. 03030 80 55 55. Sinead and Derry. Morning, Sinead.
Morning. How are you doing, Steve?
Go ahead.
I've just been listening and I've been getting quite angry, as you can imagine, although I do agree with your last contributor there. You can't compare murder of innocent people to state forces to what's been called terrorism. The state was here to protect life. That was the entire point. And what they did in this instance was proven now by the Bloody Sunday inquiry. They came into the bog side and they murdered innocent people. And it's about holding the state forces to account. It's not a sectarian thing. Because
so who's going to hold the IRA forces to account? Who's going to hold the other forces to account on the loyalist side?
Personally speaking, Stephen, that's not the issue here.
It is the issue.
But it isn't. It's about the Bloody Sunday prosecutions. That's what you're talking about.
Well, I'm talking about wider than that. You know, we hear Sinn Féin all of the time talking about equal rights and respect. Yeah. So what about those victims who are as much victims as anybody else of the IRA?
Well, we have had prosecutions.
What about those victims? Where's the transparency from the IRA?
We have had prosecutions. We've had people spend time in jail for murders.
And there are other crimes which have not been, where the perpetrators have not been brought to justice. So if this society is going to be about equal rights and respect for everyone, where's the transparency from the atrocities that the IRA carried out and the loyalist paramilitaries too? Where's the transparency?
Stephen, when you're talking about equality, this isn't equality that you're actually talking about here, because you're talking about state forces murdering innocent people versus terrorists. That's what you're talking about. You're naming them terrorists, therefore they didn't have state impunity.
I'm not naming anybody anything. What I'm saying, Sinead, is how can people call for investigations and inquiries and just into the state? Like, how's that rational?
Because the state are here to protect life. That's the point. The state were here to ensure that people weren't being murdered.
But for those people, and look, obviously not too many people would be of this mindset, but for those people who say that the paramilitaries were here to protect life, that's how they rationalise some of the killing they did, and that in itself is abhorrent to many people. But they would say they were here to protect life. Where's the scrutiny? Why is there going to be this imbalance in Northern Ireland?
Well, we do have the HIU and other mechanisms that are looking into other murders. Now, I don't advocate for anyone to be free of. I think that all victims, I do believe victims should be treated equally, and I do think that they should have the right for people who have murdered their loved ones to be brought to justice. I think that the mechanisms need to be in place. I'm not a politician and I'm not in the government, unfortunately. And the difficulty is now that we're sitting in a place where that's not happening. The Bloody Sunday ones have come to fruition now because that has been ongoing since the 1970s, trying to get to justice. Do you know what I mean?
Doug Beattie, for example, can you quote me any cases where veterans of the UDA, UVF, IRA are being pursued 30, 40 years later?
I'm only a human being,
Doug Beattie, can you?
I'm a normal person,
sure.
So I wouldn't. I don't.
Let me put that question to Doug Beattie. Doug?
Stephen, there is numerous, is the answer, and some of them are
actively pursued.
There are some being actively pursued. We've seen this last week, where John Downey is up for extradition for possible charges of murder that he may have committed in the early 70s. So he could be extradited. So he has been positively pursued. We have the Op Canova, which is ongoing at the minute, and it could bring charges against others in relation to this as well. We are pursuing. Now, the problem is it's such a mammoth task, a huge task, that it's done in a very slow manner. But the law is going and it is investigating, and I think the police are doing a good job, and they are bringing people to the courts where there is evidence, and it's right to do so.
And Peter in Banbridge. Morning, Peter.
That's right, Stephen. How you doing? All right. No, just first thing, I have a couple of questions for these army members. The both of them use the word terrorist as if it was a given that they know who a terrorist is. My version of a terrorist is completely different from what theirs is.
Well, what's your version of a terrorist?
My version is that the British Army, the way they've treated the world over, killing people, slaughtering people by the thousand, by the million, they are the terrorists. Not now. I'm no fan of the IRA nor any loyalist killers. So, have any answer for that? Either of them to your army men.
Colonel Kemp?
Well, I know what a terrorist is, and it certainly isn't a British soldier.
That's your opinion.
Okay, it is my opinion. That's what I was asked for my opinion. But occasionally, of course, you get, as I mentioned previously in this programme, you do get soldiers who behave extremely badly and deliberately set out to go and murder. Now, you could describe those as terrorists, perhaps, but a terrorist is really a part of a political organisation which has a specific intent, whereas in these cases they are simply bad people. You also get circumstances in which, as I mentioned before, that soldiers do things wrong under pressure because they're working in a very, very difficult, complex situation where things sometimes do go wrong, in the same way as every other member of society can make mistakes. When soldiers do, often it's much more serious. But the idea that the British Army is a sort of mass murder gang that's gone around the world murdering millions of people is simply ridiculous.
Well, I had to kill this century.
Deserve a response.
Mr. Beatty, I forget your first name, Mr. Camp.
Colonel Richard Kemp.
Colonel Camp. How many has the British been involved in killing this century?
To be honest, I could find that out for you by a search of the internet, but I'm sure you can do it yourself. Well, however, the job of an army, in many cases, is to kill. So if it's killed a lot of people, it's been doing its job in many circumstances.
Oh, that's good to know that. Just one question for both army men, and I'll let them go. Was the status of forces agreement in place whenever these people killed our people in Northern Ireland? Was that status of forces agreement, was that in use?
You don't need a status of forces agreement when you're using your armed forces in your own country. That only applies to protect military forces from the law of a different country when they're operating in a foreign country. So there was no status.
Okay, Peter, thank you. John and Lisburn. Morning, John.
Could I just bring, I don't want to say a bit of sanity to this, but I remember I was reared in South Armagh. I'll never forget some of the scenes that I had to witness, even driving home the school bus as a young teenager. But my point is this, how long are we going to rake over the ashes in Ireland? We're going to go back to 1689 or the rebellions. We're going to dig people up from their graves. And you know, I mean, I want to look forward to a future where there is mutual respect, where I respect other people's views, whether they're religious or political. It seems impossible because at the moment we have nobody on the hill. We have no politicians who want to sit down and thrash things out, because that's what politics is. And I would like to think that I speak for a lot of people in this country. I'm just disturbed that we're spending money on these, which could be spent on other resources like the national health, like fighting the drug epidemic that we have in almost every village in this province of ours. You know, I don't know, am I right or wrong? Is there anybody else out there who feels the same way as I do? I don't want to remember what went on in the 70s. It was terrible to see bodies and bits and pieces of people laying around the floor, people that I once knew as human beings. It was terrible to see the devastation in families and in communities by people who were sent out to murder. And I don't take sides. I would be a pacifist. But I do believe there are times when the point I want to make is, are we prepared to move on? Are our politicians this morning prepared to get back on the hill and
how does the family member of a victim move on without getting answers?
I don't know, because
justice?
I know people my age who still have to lift and lay their parents at 70, 80, 90 years of age, who were blown up and murdered, and they see that every day. They see that every day. I don't take sides. I know that people have to deal with that trauma every day, whether they're nationalist or loyalist or of no particular political affiliation. You just want to live here in peace. I want to look forward to a country where we're focusing on education, where we're focusing on health, where we're focusing on these things instead of raking over the ashes. And here's the question: who makes out of this? Extremists make out of this.
Well, what about the families of the victims?
Well, that's what I'm saying. What about those people?
What about them?
I'm a victim. I want to move on. It happened. And I know that, and I deal with people with trauma. I talk to people who have trauma. People are traumatized whenever they lose their children who die young. People are traumatized when teenagers die in car accidents. But there comes a time when you've got to move on. I know that it's hard for a lot of people to do that, and I know people who've lived in grief all their life. Maybe I have.
Doug Beatty?
Well, do you know, Stephen, I mean, it's a fair point of view, you know, and it has to be listened to. And I've heard this from a lot of people who say, look, it is time to draw a line in the sand. It is time possibly for an overarching amnesty for what went on in our Troubles. And I get that argument. But I do look back at the thousands of victims, those people who are just wanting the truth, who are wanting justice, who want accountability, and they deserve to have it. So I'm not in that position where I can just say, let's switch off from that. But I am in a position to say, let's get a overarching process on legacy that is victim-centric to allow us to move forward. But I wouldn't discount that as an argument. It's absolutely fair for people to think that way.
Here's Martin in Ballymurphy. Morning, Martin.
It's really you that I'm wanting to talk to. Right. And I hope you don't start arguing with me. Well, because it's too important to be starting an argument over.
Well, I'm not going to just sit and be quiet. It's a conversation, Martin.
I'm not asking you to be quiet. I'm asking you to not argue with what I'm saying. There was a girl on the topic of the show was about 4 soldiers. I think it was 4 who might be prosecuted for murder. Now you're not talking about the 4 soldiers. You turned it round. There was a girl phoned in from Derry trying to explain, and you were on top of her. What about the IRA? What about the IRA? This isn't about the IRA. This topic is about British soldiers who murdered innocent people.
Well, that's not true, because what we're asking today is, should they be charged for murder, or should there be an amnesty for army veterans, even if it applies to paramilitaries too? So we are widening it, Martin.
Well, there is an amnesty for British soldiers.
How's there an amnesty if some of these soldiers are being pursued?
There's never many soldiers has went through the courts, and when they did, and there's soldiers who have been put in jail, have got out early, and have been promoted.
Have you got a difficulty with the same rules applying to all?
The same rules don't apply to all.
Where is the transparency from those people who were in the IRA?
Listen till I tell you something.
Where's their records?
Listen till I tell you something.
Or the UVF, or the UDA. Where's all their records? Why don't we dig into them?
Do us a favour, Stephen. We are digging into them. They are digging into them.
Really?
Yeah, really. Are you so blind that you can't see us? There's a man being extradited from Dublin. Is there a man being extradited from Dublin for an alleged murder of 2 UDR men? Is there or is there not?
So what are you saying to me? What's your objection this morning?
You know exactly what I'm saying. Tell you, this is your ploy that you go, I'm saying to you exactly what I've just said. Is there a man being extradited from the south of Ireland?
But what's the point you're trying to make? What are you upset about this morning?
God, you are unbelievable. Not you are, Stephen Nolan, you are a con man. You can't even bring people on to have a proper discussion.
And that's what I'm doing this morning. I'm trying to get you to make your point. What has upset you? If we're talking about this complex situation in Northern Ireland where people do say, hold on a minute, what about us?
All right, well, here's what upsets me, Stephen Nolan. You upset me. Because you're supposed to be a man of the people, which is what you call yourself. You're supposed to be an impartial, investigative journalist. You're far from an impartial investigator. You're far from an investigative journalist, and you're not one bit impartial. You put out the whole unionist line. You said it the last time I was talking to you. You actually said it to me again. But what about the ones the IRA killed? Always bring it round to the IRA, no matter what you're talking about. When it's talking about people killing innocent civilians. And not only that, have you ever done a show, Stephen, on, say, like, there was are you still there?
I certainly am.
Right. I'm surprised because it was so quiet there, that's why I'm asking. There was a film showed one time. This is just a wee bit of where you're supposed to be, where you're not impartial. There was a film on before about Bobby Sands. It was 66 days, and you had a show on, and it was should to be. This is like glorifying a terrorist and blah blah blah, and the whole usual shebang about Republicans. There was a film on there called The Ballymurphy Precedent, and it points out what Colonel Mike Jackson, what he slandered.
Hold on a second.
Here we go.
Yeah,
Here we go.
yeah.
You're
I'm
doing
hosting.
It. Stop me,
I'm
stop me,
hosting.
folks.
Yeah, and I won't
Well,
stop
I'm
you,
not
Martin.
mentioning only-
It's my job to stop you.
It is in
It's
a
my
film.
job to stop you,
public
Martin. So
what
don't
I
be
said.
getting angry. It's my job
dear,
to
dear,
do this,
dear.
and it's my job to put the counterpoint. And what
Right.
I'm trying to do this morning
No,
is
see,
give
you're
you
not letting me
time
make my
and
point.
space. I've let you make your point to the point
You
where
have-
you didn't
you
think I was here anymore because I didn't interrupt you.
I've got to make my point. I'm about to make my point, and that's when you interrupt. I'm about to make my point, and when I mention the name that I mentioned, it is public knowledge. It was in a film, so I'm not saying anything out of the
Well,
ordinary.
according to you, and I would need to check out those facts before we allow this to
Well,
happen.
you should have had to check it
on a live
You
radio
shouldn't have
show.
to. You are an investigative journalist. You should know when you bring something on and you know the can of worms that it's going to open. You, as an investigative journalist, should know. You're always wanting to check something
So
out.
the anger we can hear from you this morning, Martin, is indicative of the complex situation in Northern Ireland. It is indicative of lots of different viewpoints where one side sees it just from their own point of view. Do you not think you need to widen your perspective?
Well, I think I don't need to widen my perspective whatsoever. I phoned in to make a complaint about your lack of impartiality, and you shouldn't be doing, to be quite honest, you shouldn't be doing a show on this here because it's too important and there's too many victims involved. And I'll tell you why you shouldn't be doing it, because you cannot see the British Army doing anything wrong whatsoever. You are a big supporter of the British Army. On your show last week, I mean, when you think of the people that was killed by from nationalists and Republican sides, that was murdered by the SAS, never mind all around the world, and you're promoting the SAS as if it's a holiday camp.
No, I
on
didn't.
your TV show.
No, I
now
didn't.
you think of all.
No, I didn't. I don't even know what you're talking about, in fact.
You don't know what I'm talking about.
No, I don't.
Well, did you do a show and there was something to do with?